Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the gritty, bone-chilling reality of life in a medieval castle. Picture yourself standing on a windswept hill, staring up at towering stone walls, their jagged battlements clawing at a stormy sky. The air smells of damp earth and something faintly sour, like a warning. You're about to step inside, thinking of knights and feasts. But here's the kicker. You probably won't survive this. Castles weren't fairy tale palaces. They were freezing, dangerous fortresses built for war, not comfort. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I love knowing where you're all drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push open the heavy oak door, and a blast of cold air hits you like a slap. The castle's interior is a shock. No cozy fireplaces or plush rugs, just bare stone walls slick with moisture. Your breath clouds in front of you, even though it's only autumn. Medieval castles, built between the 11th and 15th centuries, were designed to withstand sieges, not to keep you toasty. Historians note that even royal castles like Windsor lacked proper insulation, with walls often a meter thick but riddled with drafts. You shuffle forward, your thin wool cloak doing little to stop the chill seeping into your bones. It's like stepping into a giant refrigerator, except this one smells faintly of mildew and despair. As you move deeper, you notice the narrow windows, more like slits really, letting in slivers of gray light. These arrow loops were for archers, not aesthetics, and they do a terrible job of warming the place. You imagine huddling here in January, your fingers turning blue. A quirky tidbit. Some castles use tapestries to block drafts, but only the rich could afford them, and even those were often moth-eaten or damp. Your average servant? They just shivered. You spot a faded tapestry on the wall, depicting a hunt, but it's sagging under its own weight, doing nothing to stop the cold creeping up your spine. You try to warm your hands by rubbing them together, but the stone floor seems to suck the heat right out of you. Historians still argue whether castle builders prioritized defense so much they ignored basic livability, or if they just didn't know better. Either way, you're freezing. You pass a small hearth, but it's unlit. Firewood was scarce, and burning it filled rooms with smoke. You're starting to rethink that romantic image of castle life. Wasn't there supposed to be a grand feast or something? Instead, you're in a dim, icy hall, and the only sound is your teeth chattering. You wander toward a spiral staircase, hoping to find a warmer room, but the air just gets colder as you climb. The walls feel like they're closing in, and you realize this place wasn't built for comfort. It was built to survive. A joke to lighten the mood. Why did the medieval lord wear 3 cloaks? Because the castle was so cold, even his ego couldn't keep him warm. You chuckle, but it's a nervous laugh. The higher you go, the more you notice the damp patches on the walls, like the castle itself is sweating out its misery. By now, you're desperate for any heat source. You spot a brazier in a corner, but it's just a pile of cold ash. Fun fact, some castles had portable braziers, but they were as likely to set your clothes on fire as warm you up. You're starting to see why people in the Middle Ages didn't live long. Half the battle was just staying warm. You pull your cloak tighter, but it's like wrapping yourself in a wet towel. The castle's cold is relentless, and you're only in the first hall. What's waiting deeper inside? You're not sure you want to find out, but there's no turning back now. You pause, catching your breath, and notice a faint draft whistling through a crack in the wall. It's like the castle is mocking you, daring you to keep going. Another joke. What's a medieval castle's favorite season? Winter, because it loves watching you suffer. You shake your head, trying to stay focused. The cold is making your joints ache, and you're already dreaming of a modern heater. But this is your life now, at least for tonight's story. You take a step forward, the stone floor creaking underfoot, and brace yourself for what's next. You trudge deeper into the castle, still shivering from that icy welcome, and now you're noticing the walls themselves, massive, gray, and looming like they're ready to collapse on you. Remember that bone-chilling draft from the first hall? It's nothing compared to the uneasy feeling you get as a loose stone shifts underfoot. These walls, built to fend off invaders, are just as likely to crush you. Medieval castles, like the Tower of London, were constructed with local stone, often limestone or sandstone. But shoddy craftsmanship and centuries of weathering made them ticking time bombs. You glance up, half expecting a chunk of masonry to come crashing down. The corridor narrows, and you brush against a wall, feeling its rough, uneven surface snag your cloak. These stones were laid by overworked masons, and the mortar, often a cheap mix of lime and sand, crumbles at your touch. A quirky tidbit. Some castles used cow dung in their mortar for extra binding, which smells about as charming as it sounds when damp. You're starting to realize these walls aren't just cold, they're treacherous. One wrong step, and you could be buried under a pile of medieval DIY gone wrong. You duck under a low archway, and a pebble skitters across the floor, kicked loose by your boot. Historians still argue whether castle builders skimped on maintenance to save coin, or if constant wars left no time for repairs. Either way, you're dodging falling rocks like it's a deadly game of hide and seek. You pass a cracked buttress, its jagged edges catching the dim torchlight. Castles were meant to scream strength, but up close, they're more like crumbling sandcastles, ready to betray anyone inside. Your heart skips as a distant thud echoes. Probably just a loose beam, but it's enough to make you jump. Joke time to ease the nerves. Why did the castle wall go to therapy? Too many crumbling relationships. You force a laugh, but your eyes dart to every shadow. The walls are so thick, sometimes 2 meters or more, that they block out sound, making every creak feel like a warning. You're not just worried about invaders, you're scared of the castle itself turning on you. You climb a rickety wooden scaffold, likely left by some long-dead repair crew, and peer through a gap in the stonework. The view outside is stunning. Rolling hills, a distant river, but then you notice the wall's outer layer peeling away like old skin. Fun fact: during sieges, attackers used battering rams or even early cannons to exploit these weak spots. But sometimes the walls just gave up on their own. You imagine a cannonball smashing through, or worse, the whole tower collapsing while you're still inside. Your palms are sweaty now, and it's not just the cold. As you descend, a gust of wind howls through a broken window, rattling the scaffold. You grip the railing, which wobbles under your weight. These castles were built to last, but last is a relative term when the ceiling could cave in. You're starting to miss that drafty hall from before. At least it felt solid. Another joke. What's a medieval castle's favorite game? Jenga, because it's always one block from disaster. You smirk, but the humor fades as you spot a fresh crack snaking up the wall, wide enough to slip your fingers into. You reach a wider chamber, maybe a guard room, but the walls here are no better. Damp stains bloom across the stone, and a pile of rubble sits in one corner, like the castle's been shedding. You're careful where you step, avoiding loose flagstones that could twist your ankle, or worse. The air feels heavy, like the weight of the walls is pressing down on you. It's not just the cold anymore. It's the constant threat of collapse that makes this place a nightmare. You're not safe here, and the castle seems to know it. You pause, catching your breath, and notice a faint inscription carved into the stone. A mason's mark, maybe? Or a desperate prisoner's tally. It's a reminder that others have been trapped here, dodging the same dangers. You're not alone in your fear, but that's little comfort when the walls groan like they're alive. You take a cautious step forward, the floor creaking, and brace yourself for whatever this castle throws at you next. You've barely recovered from dodging those crumbling walls when a foul stench hits you like a punch to the face. You're approaching the moat, that murky ring of water circling the castle, and it's nothing like the serene lake you pictured. The smell is a mix of rotting fish, human waste, and something you can't quite name but definitely don't want to. Medieval moats, like those around Caerphilly Castle, were often stagnant, open sewers, collecting everything from kitchen slop to chamber pot contents. You gag, pulling your cloak over your nose, but it barely helps. You stand on a rickety drawbridge, peering down at the moat's greenish-black surface where bubbles pop and release more of that vile odor. This isn't just water, it's a breeding ground for disease and a dumping ground for the castle's filth. A quirky tidbit. Some moats were stocked with fish for food, but good luck eating anything that swam in this toxic soup. You imagine trying to choke down a fish that smells like it bathed in a latrine, and your stomach churns. The drawbridge creaks under your weight, and you notice the moat's edges are lined with slimy algae and what looks suspiciously like bones. Historians still argue whether moats were more about defense or just a convenient trash heap, but either way, they were deadly. Falling in could mean drowning, or worse, catching a fever that'd kill you in days. You take a cautious step, praying the bridge holds, because a dip in that water is a death sentence. You glance across the moat, spotting a wooden chute jutting from the castle wall. That's where they empty the latrines, straight into the moat. Joke time to lighten the mood. Why did the moat go out of business? Because it was always in the dumps. You chuckle, but the smell makes your eyes water. The moat's surface ripples, maybe from a rat or something worse, and you're suddenly very aware of how close you're standing to the edge. As you cross the bridge, you notice the water's depth varies, shallow in spots, deep in others, making it a nightmare for invaders, but also for anyone who slips. Fun fact, during sieges, attackers sometimes tried to drain moats, only to unleash a flood of sewage that made everyone sick. You imagine wading through that, your boots sinking into the muck, and shudder. The moat isn't just gross, it's a health hazard, and you're stuck living right next to it. You reach the other side, but the stench follows you, clinging to your clothes like an unwanted guest. The castle's outer courtyard is no better. Puddles of moat water have seeped into the ground, creating muddy patches that smell almost as bad. You're starting to miss those drafty halls, even with their crumbling walls. At least they didn't assault your nose like this. Another joke. What's a moat's favorite song? Smells like Teen Spirit, but way worse. You smirk, but it's hard to laugh when you're breathing through your mouth. You pause by a low wall, trying to escape the worst of the smell, and notice a pile of refuse nearby. Kitchen scraps, broken pottery, and worse, all waiting to be tossed into the moat. This place is a cycle of filth, and you're caught in it. The moat's not just a barrier, it's a constant reminder that castle life is dirty, dangerous, and downright miserable. You're already dreading the next time you have to cross that bridge. You take a step toward the castle's main gate, hoping to leave the moat behind, but the smell lingers, like it's burned into your senses. You're starting to understand why people in the Middle Ages didn't live long. Between the cold, the crumbling walls, and this toxic moat, survival feels like a miracle. You glance back at the water, its surface still and menacing, and hurry toward the gate, desperate for fresher air. But deep down, you know this castle has more nasty surprises waiting. You stumble through the castle gate, still reeling from that moat's stench, only to find yourself in a courtyard so cramped it feels like the walls are squeezing you. The space is a chaotic jumble. Servants scurry past, carts creak under piles of hay, and chickens cluck underfoot. You expected grand halls, but medieval castles like Bodayam were built for defense, not elbow room, with living quarters packed tighter than a modern studio apartment. You sidestep a pile of manure, realizing this place prioritizes survival over space. You duck into what looks like a living area, but it's barely bigger than a closet. The room's walls are bare stone, and a single straw mattress sits in the corner, shared by who knows how many people. Space was so scarce that even nobles often bunked together, their beds crammed into alcoves. A quirky tidbit. Some castles had squints, tiny peepholes in walls so priests could spy on sleepers to ensure no funny business. You glance around, half expecting to catch a glint of eyes watching you, and feel a shiver that's not just from the cold. You try to stretch, but your elbows graze the walls. Historians still argue whether castle designers ignored comfort to maximize fortification, or if they simply couldn't afford bigger rooms. Either way, you're claustrophobic. You step back into the courtyard, only to bump into a servant carrying a stack of firewood. There's no room to maneuver. Every inch is packed with people, animals, or supplies. You're starting to feel like a sardine in a stone can. A joke to ease the tension. Why did the castle hire a minimalist? Because it was already too full. You chuckle, but the crush of bodies around you kills the humor fast. You weave through the crowd, dodging a dog and a toddler, and find a narrow hallway. It's no better. Your shoulders brush both walls, and you have to turn sideways to pass a barrel. This place is a maze of tight spaces, and you're already dreaming of wide-open fields. You enter another room, this one a kitchen, and it's even worse. Cooks elbow each other over a smoky fire, pots clanging in a space barely big enough for two. Fun fact, Castle kitchens were often so small that meals for hundreds were cooked in shifts, with apprentices sleeping on the floor between tasks. You imagine trying to nap next to a scalding cauldron, and your back aches just thinking about it. The air is thick with grease and sweat, and you're desperate for a breath of fresh air, but the only window is a tiny slit. You squeeze past a table piled with half-chopped vegetables and nearly trip over a sack of flour. Every corner of this castle is stuffed to the brim, and you're starting to miss that smelly moat. At least it had open sky above it. Another joke. What's a castle's favorite dance? The sardine shuffle, because everyone's packed in tight. You force a smile, but the walls feel like they're closing in, and the noise, shouts, clangs, bleating goats, is overwhelming. You finally find a slightly larger hall, but it's no relief. It's packed with soldiers polishing armor, maids hauling laundry, and a bard strumming a lute-off key. There's nowhere to sit, nowhere to think. You're surrounded by people, yet you've never felt more trapped. The castle's design screams defense, narrow passages to slow invaders, thick walls to stop arrows. But it's a nightmare for daily life. You're starting to wonder how anyone functioned in this overcrowded stone box. You pause, leaning against a wall, but even that's uncomfortable. The stone's too cold, and someone's already yelling at you to move. You're not just fighting for space, you're fighting for sanity. This castle is a pressure cooker, and you're caught in the middle. You take a deep breath, trying to calm your racing heart, and push forward, hoping the next room offers a sliver of relief. But deep down, you know this place is built to confine, not comfort. You escape the suffocating courtyard, your shoulders still aching from brushing those cramped walls, only to find yourself in a new kind of hell, a castle under siege. The air is thick with panic as shouts echo from the battlements. You're handed a stale crust of bread, your ration for the day, and told to make it last. Medieval sieges, like the one at Rochester Castle in 1215, could drag on for months, turning castles into starvation traps. You clutch the bread, its surface speckled with green mold, and realize hunger is your new enemy. You huddle in a corner of the Great Hall where others are rationing their own meager scraps. The castle's stores, barrels of salted meat and grain, are dwindling fast. A quirky tidbit. Some sieges got so desperate that people boiled leather shoes for soup, claiming it was nutritious. You eye your worn boots, wondering if you'd ever be that hungry, and your stomach growls in protest. The bread in your hand feels like a rock, but you nibble it anyway, wincing at the bitter taste. The hall is packed with gaunt faces, everyone eyeing each other's rations. Historians still argue whether castle garrisons starved more from poor planning or because attackers poisoned their supplies. Either way, you're caught in the middle, your belly aching as you try to savor every crumb. You hear a distant thud, catapults lobbing stones at the walls, and flinch. The siege isn't just starving you, it's fraying your nerves, a joke to break the gloom. Why did the siege diet fail? Because moldy bread isn't exactly keto. You force a laugh, but it's hard when your mouth is dry and your stomach's screaming. You glance at a nearby child, clutching a single onion like it's gold. Sieges turned castles into pressure cookers, where food was power. Fun fact, during some sieges, lords ate better than their men, hoarding delicacies while others starved. You're no lord, so you're stuck with this fuzzy bread. You shuffle toward a window slit, hoping for a breeze to clear your head, but the view is grim. Enemy banners in the distance, smoke rising from their camp. The castle's walls, those crumbling menaces you dodged earlier, are your only protection now, but they're also your prison. You're trapped, and the hunger is relentless. You try to distract yourself by counting the stones in the wall, but your thoughts keep drifting to food. Fresh apples, warm stew, anything but this moldy crust. The hall grows quieter as night falls, but the silence is worse. You hear stomachs rumbling, including your own. Another joke. What's a siege's favorite game? Hungry, hungry hippos, but with no hippos and no food? You smirk, but the humor fades fast. You're starting to feel lightheaded and the bread's gone. You tuck the empty cloth it was wrapped in under your arm, a pathetic reminder of your last meal. The siege has only been a week, but it feels like forever. You find a spot near a cold hearth, hoping to rest, but sleep won't come. The fear of starvation mixes with the distant crash of siege engines, and you're wondering how long you can last. You remember that smelly moat from before? At least it wasn't trying to kill you with hunger. Now, every creak of the floorboards makes you hope it's a servant with more food. But it's just another soldier, his face as hollow as yours. The castle's strength is its curse, built to hold out, but at the cost of your survival. You curl up, trying to ignore the gnawing in your gut. The siege is a slow, cruel torture, and you're not sure what's worse, the hunger or the waiting. You close your eyes, dreaming of a feast that'll never come, and brace yourself for another day of this nightmare. The castle's walls may keep the enemy out, but they're locking you in with starvation. You're still clutching that empty cloth from your moldy bread, the siege's hunger gnawing at you, when a guard grabs your arm and pulls you down a dark staircase. The air grows damp and heavy, and you realize you're headed to the castle's dungeon, a place that makes the cramped courtyard and smelly moat seem like paradise. Medieval dungeons, like those in Warwick Castle, were often carved into the bedrock, designed to break spirits as much as hold prisoners. You stumble on the uneven steps, the guard's torch casting flickering shadows that look like clawing hands. You reach the bottom and the smell hits you. Mold, rust, and something sour, like fear itself. You're shoved into a cell, the iron bars slamming shut behind you. The floor is slick with slime, and chains dangle from the walls, rusted but sturdy. A quirky tidbit. Some dungeons had oubliettes, tiny pits where prisoners were forgotten, sometimes dropped through trapdoors to rot. You glance at the floor, half expecting it to open beneath you, and your heart races. The cell is so small you can't lie down without curling up. Historians still argue whether dungeons were used more for punishment or to scare vassals into loyalty, but either way, you're terrified. You tug at the chains, their cold metal biting your skin. This isn't just a prison, it's a tomb. You hear a faint drip of water, but it's not drinkable. Just another taunt in this miserable hole. A joke to cut the dread. Why did the dungeon throw a party? Because it was great at keeping people in. You force a chuckle, but the sound echoes eerily. You notice scratches on the walls, tally marks, or maybe desperate clawing. Fun fact, some prisoners carved messages, hoping for rescue, but most were left to starve or freeze. You're not a prisoner, not really, but the guard's glare makes you feel like one, and the dungeon's chill is worse than the castle's drafty halls. You pace the tiny cell, each step squelching in the damp. The torchlight fades as the guard moves away, leaving you in near darkness. You're starting to miss that siege ration, mold and all. The dungeon's silence is oppressive, broken only by the occasional skitter of rats. You imagine being locked here for days, weeks, your only company the ghosts of past prisoners. The castle's upper levels were bad, but this is a new level of misery. You lean against the wall, but it's slimy, and you jerk back. Another joke. What's a dungeon's favorite hobby? Collecting cobwebs and broken dreams. You smirk, but your breath catches as you hear a low moan from another cell. Is it another prisoner or just the wind? You're not sure you want to know. The dungeon's purpose is clear, to crush hope. Even if you're just visiting, the weight of this place presses on your chest. You try to distract yourself by tracing the bars with your fingers, but they're coated in grime. You're starting to understand why castles were feared as much by their inhabitants as by their enemies. The moat, the crumbling walls, the siege, those were awful, but this dungeon is personal. It's designed to make you feel small, helpless, forgotten. You shudder, remembering those oubliette stories, and pray you're not standing on one. The guard finally returns, his torch a faint glow in the distance. You're led out, but the dungeon's chill clings to you, like it's seeped into your bones. You climb the stairs, each step a relief, but you can't shake the feeling that the castle is watching, waiting to drag you back down. You're free for now, but the memory of those chains and that darkness lingers, a reminder that this place holds horrors far worse than hunger or cold. You're still shaking from that dungeon's icy grip, the memory of those rusted chains haunting you as you climb back to the castle's main level. But before you can catch your breath, a new stench assaults you, sharp, rancid, and unmistakably human. You've stumbled into the latrine, or rather, the garderobe, a grim nook carved into the castle wall. Medieval sanitation, as seen in places like Dover Castle, was a nightmare. with garderobes often just holes dropping waste into the moat or a pit below. You peer into the dark chute, and the smell makes your eyes water. You perch cautiously on the wooden seat, its surface worn smooth but suspiciously sticky. The chute below leads straight to the moat. Yup, that same filthy moat you gagged at earlier. A quirky tidbit. Nobles sometimes used moss or wool scraps as toilet paper, but you're stuck with a handful of straw, which feels about as useful as wiping with a twig. You try not to think about the rats you hear scurrying in the darkness below, probably feasting on the castle's waste. The guardrobe is freezing, with a draft whistling up from the chute, chilling your legs. Historians still argue whether these latrines were placed in outer walls for convenience or to double as defensive weak points during sieges. Either way, you're vulnerable. And the thought of an enemy arrow flying up the chute makes you hurry. You finish as fast as you can, but the stench clings to you like a curse. A joke to lighten the mood? Why did the guardrobe get bad reviews? Because it was a real dump. You chuckle, but it's hard to laugh when you're holding your breath. You step out, only to realize the smell follows you into the hallway. Fun fact, some castles had communal latrines, where you'd sit elbow to elbow with strangers, making this private nook a rare luxury. You're grateful for the solitude, but the experience is still a nightmare. You wander down the corridor, desperate for fresh air, but the castle offers no relief. Every few steps, you pass another guardrobe chute, each adding to the faint, pervasive stink. You're starting to miss the dungeon's damp mold. At least it didn't smell like an open sewer. The castle's sanitation system, if you can call it that, is a constant reminder of how little thought went into comfort. You're not just fighting cold or hunger. You're fighting to stay clean in a place that's basically a giant outhouse. Another joke. What's a medieval latrine's favorite motto? Let it flow, let it go. You smirk, but your nose wrinkles as you pass a servant emptying a chamber pot into a nearby chute. The liquid splashes, and you jump back, barely avoiding a stray droplet. This place is a health hazard, and you're starting to understand why diseases spread so fast here. The moat, the cramped quarters, the siege rations, none of them compare to the daily indignity of these latrines. You find a small window and lean toward it, hoping for a breeze, but the air outside carries a whiff of the moat below. There's no escape. You're trapped in a cycle of filth, and the guardrobe is just the start. You try to distract yourself by counting the stones in the wall, but your mind keeps drifting back to that awful seat and the endless drop below. You're not sure what's worse, the smell or the fact that you'll have to use it again tomorrow. You push forward, your boots echoing in the dim corridor, and pray the next room offers something less revolting. But deep down, you know this castle is built on grime, and every step brings a new kind of misery. You pull your cloak tighter, as if it could shield you from the stench, and brace yourself for whatever's next. You're still gagging from that guardrobe's stench, the memory of that sticky seat and whistling chute clinging to you as you hurry down a smoky corridor. The air shifts, now heavy with a new threat. Charred wood and something acrid. You've stumbled into a hall where a massive hearth roars, but it's not the cozy fireplace you hoped for. Medieval castles, like Conwy Castle, were fire traps, with open flames and wooden beams creating a constant risk of disaster. You flinch as a spark pops, landing dangerously close to a pile of straw. You edge away from the hearth, its heat intense but uneven, barely warming the room's far corners. The walls are blackened with soot, and you notice wooden rafters overhead, dry as tinder. A quirky tidbit, some castles used fire dogs, metal stands to hold logs, but they often overheated and sparked, setting rugs or clothing ablaze. You eye the flames warily, imagining your cloak catching fire while you're just trying to thaw your frozen hands. The room is crowded with servants tending the fire, their faces glistening with sweat. Historians still argue whether castle fires were more deadly from neglect or because no one had time to manage them properly during sieges. Either way, you're nervous. One wrong move, and this hall could be an inferno. You step back, but a log shifts, sending a shower of embers onto the floor. You stomp one out, your heart racing. A joke to calm your nerves. Why did the castle hire a fire marshal? Because it was tired of burning out. You chuckle, but the humor fades as you notice a singed tapestry hanging too close to the hearth. Fun fact, castle fires were so common that some lords kept barrels of water in every room, though they often froze in winter. You spot one in the corner, its surface iced over, useless against a real blaze. You try to find a safer spot, but the room's layout is a mess. Wooden benches, straw-strewn floors, and dangling curtains all begging to catch fire. You're starting to miss that moldy siege bread. At least it didn't threaten to roast you alive. The hearth's roar is deafening, and you're torn between freezing in the shadows or risking burns near the flames. You choose the shadows, but a gust from a window slit fans the fire, and you duck as another spark flies. Another joke. What's the castle fire's favorite dance? The flamenco. You force a smile, but your eyes are locked on the hearth, where a servant carelessly tosses on a log, sending more embers scattering. You're starting to understand why castle life was so short. Between the cold, the filth, and now this, danger is everywhere. You glance at the ceiling, praying those beams don't catch, but they're already warm to the touch. You weave through the crowd, dodging a maid with a flaming torch who's lighting wall sconces. The torches are another hazard, their pitch dripping onto the floor. You're surrounded by fire risks, and there's no escape. The moat, the dungeon, the latrine, none of them prepared you for this constant threat of burning alive. You're starting to feel like you're in a medieval microwave, and you're the main course. You find a corner far from the hearth, but the air is still smoky, stinging your eyes. You cough, your throat dry, and realize there's no safe place here. The castle's warmth comes at a deadly cost, and you're caught between freezing and frying. You pull your cloak tighter, as if it could protect you from the flames, and edge toward the door, hoping the next room is less of a death trap. But the crackle of the fire follows you, a reminder that this castle is as eager to burn you as it is to freeze you. You're still coughing from the smoky hall, the crackle of that fire haunting you as you stumble into a new chamber, hoping for relief. Instead, you're hit with a faint buzzing and an itch on your arm. You scratch, but it's not just you. Something's crawling in the straw underfoot. Medieval castles, like those in the 14th century, were breeding grounds for pests, with fleas, lice, and rats thriving in the filth. You slap at your neck, realizing this place is a plague pit waiting to happen. You scan the room, a storage area piled with sacks of grain and old furs, all crawling with tiny black specks. Fleas leap onto your legs, and you dance in place, trying to shake them off. A quirky tidbit. Some castle dwellers believed rubbing onion juice on their skin repelled pests, but it just made them smell like a bad stew. You're tempted to try it, but the thought of fleas and onion breath is too much. You brush at your cloak, but it's already a flea buffet. The air is thick with dust, and you sneeze, probably inhaling something nasty. Historians still argue whether castle pest problems were worse because of poor hygiene or because stored food attracted vermin. Either way, you're itching everywhere. You spot a rat scurry across the floor, its eyes glinting in the torchlight. This isn't just uncomfortable, it's a health crisis. You're starting to miss that fiery hearth, sparks and all. A joke to ease the scratching. Why did the flea love castle life? Free room and board, no questions asked. You chuckle, but it's hard to laugh when you're swatting at your arms. Fun fact, the Black Death, spread by fleas, wiped out entire castle garrisons, with places like Kenilworth Castle losing half their people in the 1340s. You're not just fighting itchiness, you're dodging a medieval biohazard. You kick at the straw, hoping to scare off the pests, but it only stirs up more fleas. You're starting to understand why castle folk looked so miserable in old tapestries. Between the moat's stink, the dungeon's chill, and now this, they were under constant attack. You try to find a clean spot to stand, but the floor is a carpet of crumbs and rat droppings. You're not safe anywhere, and the itching is driving you mad. Another joke. What's a castle pest's favorite sport? The itch-athlon. You force a smile, but your skin crawls as another flea bites your ankle. You're desperate for relief, but there's no soap, no clean water, just a bucket in the corner that looks more suspicious than helpful. You're starting to feel like a walking petri dish, and the castle's filth is winning. You remember that guardrobe's straw, toilet paper, and shutter. Hygiene here is a lost cause. You edge toward a doorway, hoping to escape the infestation, but a servant brushes past, scratching furiously. Great, it's contagious. The walls are damp, perfect for mold, and you spot a spider the size of your hand in a corner. This place isn't just dirty, it's a full-on ecosystem of gross. You're starting to miss the siege's hunger pangs. At least they didn't make you itch. You pull your cloak tighter, but it's no use. The fleas have already claimed you as their new home. You pause, trying to scratch discreetly, but everyone's doing it, like a grim castle dance. You're not just fighting pests, you're fighting despair. This castle is a trap, and every room brings a new kind of misery. You take a shaky step forward, your skin prickling, and pray the next chamber offers some relief. But the buzzing follows you, a reminder that in this place, even the smallest creatures can make your life hell. You're still scratching from those relentless fleas, their bites a fiery reminder of the castle's filth, when you decide to flee that pest-ridden storage room. You head up a narrow spiral staircase, hoping for cleaner air, but your foot slips on an uneven step, and you grab the wall to avoid a tumble. These staircases, common in castles like Stirling, were designed to slow invaders, with uneven, worn steps and tight curves that make every ascent a gamble. You steady yourself, heart pounding, realizing the castle's architecture is as dangerous as its pests. You climb cautiously, each step a different height, some so worn they're practically slopes. The stone is slick with damp, and there's no handrail, just a rough wall that grazes your knuckles. A quirky tidbit. Some staircases were built clockwise to favor right-handed defenders, giving them room to swing swords while attackers struggled. You're no attacker, but you're struggling plenty, your legs aching as you navigate the treacherous spiral. One misstep, and you're rolling back to that flea-infested room, or worse. The staircase is dark, lit only by a flickering torch high above. Historians still argue whether these death trap designs were intentional to thwart enemies or just shoddy craftsmanship. Either way, you're one slip from a broken ankle. You pause, catching your breath, and notice a gouge in the wall, maybe from a sword or a clumsy servant's fall. This castle isn't just uncomfortable, it's actively trying to trip you up. A joke to steady your nerves, why did the staircase get promoted? It always kept people on their toes. You chuckle, but it's shaky as you grip the wall tighter. Fun fact, castle staircases were so deadly that even nobles, like a 13th century lord at Corfe Castle, died from falls, their heavy armor dragging them down. You're not in armor, but your cloak feels heavy enough, tangling around your legs like it's conspiring with the steps. You keep climbing, but the staircase seems endless, each turn disorienting. You're starting to miss that smelly garderobe, at least it was on solid ground. The air grows colder, and you realize you're nearing an outer tower, where drafts howl through arrow slits. You trip again, banging your shin, and mutter a curse under your breath. This isn't just a staircase, it's a medieval obstacle course, and you're losing. Another joke? What's a castle staircase's favorite prank? Making you think you're almost there. You force a smile, but your throbbing shin isn't amused. You're halfway up, and the torch above gutters, casting wild shadows that make the steps look even more uneven. You're starting to understand why castle life was so brutal. Between the fleas, the fires, and now this. Every move is a risk. You wonder how anyone made it to old age here without a neck brace. You finally reach a landing, but it's no relief. Just a tiny platform with another staircase looming ahead. You lean against the wall, panting, and notice a crack in the stone, reminding you of those crumbling walls from before. This place is falling apart, and you're dodging more than just steps. You're tempted to sit, but the floor's damp, and you're not keen on adding mold to your list of problems. You're trapped in a vertical maze, and the castle's laughing at your misery. You take a deep breath, steeling yourself for the next climb. Your legs are screaming, and every step feels like a dare. You're not just fighting gravity, you're fighting a building that seems designed to break you. You glance down the spiral, the darkness swallowing the path below, and push forward, praying the next room doesn't involve more stairs. But the creak of the stone beneath you says this castle has plenty more traps in store. You're still wincing from that banged shin, the treacherous staircase's parting gift, as you limp into a dimly lit kitchen. The air is heavy with a sour tang, and you spot a table piled with meat so rancid it's practically waving at you. Medieval castles, like Leeds Castle, struggled to store food, with damp cellars and poor preservation turning meals into health hazards. You gag, holding your cloak to your nose, but the smell of rot sneaks through, worse than that moat stench. You step closer, drawn by morbid curiosity, and see a slab of pork speckled with gray-green patches. Servants are hacking at it, trying to salvage edible bits, but flies buzz around like they've claimed dibs. A quirky tidbit. Some castles used piss kitchens, where urine was boiled to make saltpeter for preserving meat. Yeah, it's as gross as it sounds. You're suddenly grateful for the moldy siege bread from before. At least it didn't smell like a corpse. The kitchen is a chaos of clanging pots and shouting cooks, all working around a meager fire. Historians still argue whether food spoilage was worse because of bad storage, or because castles hoarded supplies for sieges, letting them rot. Either way, you're not eating that pork. You spot a barrel of apples, but they're wrinkled and wormy, oozing onto the floor. Your stomach, still cranky from the siege, twists in protest. A joke to cut the nausea. Why did the castle chef quit? The meat was too far gone to save. You chuckle, but it's weak as you dodge a servant carrying a dubious stew. Fun fact, medieval diets relied heavily on preserved foods, but without refrigeration, salting or smoking often failed, leaving castles with rancid feasts. You're starting to miss the fleas. They were annoying, but they didn't make you want to hurl. You weave through the kitchen, avoiding puddles of what you hope is just spilled broth. The air is warm but cloying, and you're torn between hunger and fear of food poisoning. You remember that fiery hearth's sparks, but this is worse. Eating here feels like playing roulette with your insides. You spot a loaf of bread, but it's speckled with the same mold you choked down during the siege. Nope, not happening. Another joke. What's a castle's favorite dish? Spoiled surprise. You force a smile, but your eyes water from the stench. A cook offers you a slice of something slimy, calling it potted fish, but you wave it away, muttering about a sensitive stomach. You're starting to understand why castle folk drank so much ale. It was safer than the food or water. You're tempted to find some, but the barrels here look as sketchy as the meat. You pause by a storage nook, hoping for something edible, but it's just more rot. Cheese with blue veins that look more like a science experiment than food. The castle's food woes are a new kind of torture, making the dungeon's chill seem almost bearable. You're not just fighting hunger, you're fighting to keep your last meal down. The cooks keep working, oblivious to the flies, and you wonder how anyone survived this diet without a cast iron stomach. You head for the door, desperate for air that doesn't smell like decay. Your boots stick to the floor, and you don't want to know why. This kitchen is a biohazard, and you're done risking your health for a bite. You're starting to see the castle as a gauntlet, each room a new way to suffer. You push into the next corridor, the rot's stench fading but not forgotten, and brace yourself for whatever fresh misery awaits. At least it can't be worse than that pork, right? You're still queasy from that rancid kitchen, the memory of that gray-green pork haunting you as you stumble into a dimly lit hall. It's late, and you're desperate for rest, but the castle is alive with noise, clanging armor, drunken shouts, and the distant howl of dogs. Medieval castles, like those in the 13th century, were never quiet, with garrisons, servants, and livestock creating a constant racket that made sleep a fantasy. You slump onto a straw pallet, but the clamor pierces your skull, promising a night of misery. You pull a thin blanket over you, but it's scratchy and smells faintly of horse. The hall is packed with others trying to sleep, soldiers snoring, maids whispering, a baby wailing somewhere. A quirky tidbit. Some castles had snorers' corners where loud sleepers were banished, but you're not that lucky. You're surrounded by a symphony of grunts and creaks, and every clang from the guardroom makes you jump. You're starting to miss that dungeon's eerie silence, chains and all. The straw beneath you rustles, probably crawling with fleas from that pest pit earlier. Historians still argue whether castle noise was worse during wartime or just daily chaos. But either way, you're wide awake. You try stuffing your ears with bits of cloth, but it barely muffles the din. A knight stomps past, his armor jangling like a dropped toolbox, and you groan, pulling the blanket over your head. A joke to soothe your frayed nerves. Why did the castle stay up all night? It had too many nightmares. You chuckle, but it's hard when a dog's bark echoes like a cannon. Fun fact, medieval sleep schedules were often biphasic, with people napping in shifts, but this castle's noise makes even that impossible. You're exhausted, your eyes burning. But every time you drift off, a new sound. Hooves, a dropped pot, jerks you awake. You roll over, trying to find a less lumpy spot, but the pallet's straw pokes through like tiny daggers. You're starting to understand why castle folk looked so haggard. Between the rotten food, the deadly stares, and now this, rest is a cruel joke. You glance at a window slit hoping for dawn, but it's pitch black outside, and a draft chills your face. You're trapped in a sleepless nightmare, and the castle's chaos is relentless. Another joke. What's a castle's lullaby? A chorus of clanks and snores. You force a smile, but your head throbs as a servant trips over a bench, cursing loudly. You're tempted to yell, but everyone's too tired to care. You try counting sheep, but they morph into the rats from that storage room, scurrying through your mind. You're not just fighting noise, you're fighting for sanity in a place that never shuts up. You sit up, giving up on sleep, and notice a guard pacing nearby, his boots thudding rhythmically. It's almost hypnotic, but then he stops to argue with another soldier, their voices rising. You're starting to miss the siege's hunger pangs. At least you could doze through those. The hall's air is stale, and you cough, your throat dry from the smoky hearth you fled before. This castle is a sensory assault, and you're losing the battle. You lie back down, staring at the rafters, where shadows dance from a distant torch. The noise swirls around you. Laughter, footsteps, a lute played badly, and you wonder how anyone functioned here without going mad. You're not just tired, you're unraveling. You close your eyes, willing sleep to come, but the castle's racket laughs at your hopes. You brace yourself for a long night, knowing the next room will likely bring more torment. You're still bleary-eyed from that sleepless night, the castle's relentless noise ringing in your ears as you drag yourself into a bustling great hall. The space is packed with people, nobles, servants, even a stray dog. But there's no corner to call your own. You realize medieval castles like Caernarfon offered zero privacy, with open halls and shared spaces exposing every moment of your life. You try to find a quiet spot to catch your breath, but eyes follow you, and whispers trail your every step. You settle on a bench, but a servant's sweeping broom nudges your feet, and a noble's glare makes you shift uncomfortably. Everyone's watching, your posture, your ragged cloak, even the way you scratch a flea bite from that pest pit. A quirky tidbit. Some castles had spying holes in walls, letting lords eavesdrop on vassals or catch gossip. You glance up, half expecting to see a peephole, and feel exposed, like you're on a medieval reality show with no escape. The hall's chaos doesn't help. Maids gossip loudly, knights boast, and a bard's lute screeches off-key. Historians still argue whether this lack of privacy was a deliberate control tactic or just a byproduct of cramped castle design. Either way, you're suffocating under the scrutiny. You try to eat a stale biscuit from your pocket, but a child stares, and you fumble, dropping crumbs. Privacy isn't just gone. It's a myth here. A joke to ease the tension. Why did the castle ban secrets? Because the walls had too many ears. You chuckle, but it's nervous as a servant brushes past, eyeing your biscuit like it's evidence. Fun fact, even nobles shared beds with retainers, meaning personal space was a luxury even for the rich. You're starting to miss that noisy hall from last night. At least you could hide under a blanket there. Here, every move is public, and you're the unwilling star. You stand hoping to slip away, but a knight calls you over, demanding you fetch his cloak. You're not a servant, but the crowd's watching, so you comply, cheeks burning. You're starting to understand why castle life felt like a cage. Between the rancid food, the deadly stares, and now this, you're never alone, yet always judged. You hand over the cloak, but the knight's sneer lingers, and you feel smaller than ever. Another joke? What's a castle's favorite social media? Wall-to-wall surveillance. You force a smile, but your skin prickles as a maid whispers to another, glancing your way. You're desperate for a moment alone, but the hall's design, long tables, open spaces, makes it impossible. You try to focus on the tapestry above, but even its woven hunters seem to stare. You're not just fighting for space, you're fighting for a shred of dignity. You weave through this crowd, dodging a spilled goblet and a dog's tail, but there's no private nook. Even the alcoves are occupied. Lovers arguing, scribes scribbling, everyone in each other's business. You remember that smelly garderobe? It was gross, but at least it was solo. Here, you're on display, and the pressure's relentless. You're starting to wonder how anyone kept their sanity without a door to lock. You pause by a window slit, hoping for a moment's peace, but a gust of cold air and a passerby's cough remind you there's no escape. The castle's open design is a trap, stripping away your autonomy. You're not just tired, you're exposed, vulnerable, and aching for a hideaway. You take a shaky breath, steeling yourself for the next public ordeal, and move forward, knowing this castle will never let you be alone. You're still reeling from the Great Hall's prying eyes, your every move dissected like a public performance, when you're drawn to a quieter chamber where a woman's pained cries echo. You peek inside and see a makeshift birthing room, a grim scene unfolding on a straw-strewn bed. Medieval childbirth, even in castles like Arundel, was a gamble, with crude medical knowledge and filthy conditions stacking the odds against survival. You hover at the doorway, heart pounding, as midwives bustle around the laboring woman, their hands stained with herbs and worry. The room is lit by a single candle, casting shadows on walls damp with mildew. The air smells of sweat and something metallic, and you notice a bowl of murky water, hardly sterile. A quirky tidbit. Midwives sometimes used charms like eagle feathers to ease labor, but they were as useful as a prayer against a storm. You wince as the woman groans, her face pale, and you're struck by how vulnerable she is in this stone fortress that's already tried to break you with its fleas and fires. The midwives mutter about herbs like rue or fennel, but their tools, a rusty knife, a cloth that's seen better days, look more dangerous than helpful. Historians still argue whether high childbirth mortality in castles stemmed from poor hygiene or a lack of trained physicians. Either way, you're witnessing a battle where the odds feel grim. You want to help, but you're frozen, useless, as the woman grips a rope tied to the bed frame, her knuckles white. A joke to cut the tension. Why did the castle midwife moonlight as a gambler? Because every birth was a roll of the dice. You force a chuckle, but it's hollow as another cry pierces the air. Fun fact, noble women often fared worse than peasants, as castle births were overseen by prestigious but clueless attendants, leading to infections. You're starting to miss that noisy hall. At least it didn't feel like a life or death drama. You notice a small crowd gathering. Servants, a priest, whispering prayers or gossip, making the room feel like that privacy-starved great hall all over again. The woman's pain is public, and you're struck by the cruelty of it. You remember that rancid kitchen's flies. What's stopping them from landing here? The castle's filth is everywhere, and this birthing room is no exception. You're not just watching suffering, you're watching a system that fails its people at their most fragile. Another joke. What's a medieval midwife's favorite song? Push It by Salt and Peppa. You smirk, but your stomach twists as the woman's cries grow weaker. The midwives exchange worried glances, and you realize the baby's not coming easily. You're no expert, but you know enough to fear the worst. Hemorrhage, infection, or a stillbirth, all too common here. The castle's cold, its food rotten, its stairs deadly, and now its medicine is a cruel joke. You're starting to wonder if anything in this place is built to nurture life. You step back, unable to bear the tension, but the cries follow you. The priest starts chanting, his voice a low drone, and you notice a charm, a carved stone, tied to the bed. It's useless, but it's all they have. You're starting to feel the weight of this castle's failures, each room a new way to suffer. You're not just an observer. You're trapped in a world where even birth is a brush with death. You slip into the corridor, the cries fading but not forgotten. Your hands tremble, and you lean against the cold stone, trying to shake the image of that struggling woman. The castle's not just uncomfortable, it's merciless, and you're dreading what's next. You take a shaky step forward, the echo of those cries in your ears, and brace yourself for another dose of the stone nightmare's cruelty. You're still shaken from the birthing room's raw desperation, those cries echoing in your mind as you wander into a drafty tower chamber. The air bites harder here, and you realize winter's grip is tightening. Medieval castles, like those in northern Europe, were brutal in winter, their stone walls trapping cold like a freezer. You huddle by a small hearth, its pathetic flames barely denting the chill. Your breath clouds, and your fingers, still itching from those fleas, are turning numb. You pull your cloak tighter, but it's as useful as a paper towel against the icy wind whistling through an arrow slit. The room's bare, stone floor, a rickety stool, no tapestries to block the cold. A quirky tidbit. Some castle folk stuffed rags in window slits to keep warm, but they often caught fire from nearby braziers, trading frostbite for burns. You glance at the hearth, remembering that fiery hall's sparks, and decide you'd rather shiver than risk another blaze. The cold is relentless, seeping into your bones like it's personal. Historians still argue whether castle winters were deadlier because of poor insulation or because firewood was rationed to save costs. Either way, you're freezing. You rub your hands together, but they're stiff, and you're starting to miss that crowded great hall. At least body heat was free. The floor's so cold it stings through your boots, and you pace to keep your blood moving. A joke to thaw your mood. Why did the castle hate winter? It was tired of being an ice cube. You chuckle, but your teeth chatter, ruining the effect. Fun fact. During harsh winters, like the Great Famine of 1315, castle garrisons sometimes burned furniture to stay warm, leaving rooms emptier than your siege rations. You eye the stool, tempted, but it's too damp to burn anyway. This castle's not just uncomfortable, it's a survival test, and winter's the final boss. You notice a thin layer of frost on the walls, sparkling in the hearth's faint glow. It's almost pretty, but it's also a reminder that this place is trying to freeze you solid. You're starting to understand why castle folk bundled up in layers of wool and furs. Without them, you're toast, or rather, an icicle. You remember that smelly garderobe's drafty chute. This is worse, a full-body deep freeze. You're not just fighting cold, you're fighting to stay human in a stone refrigerator. Another joke. What's a castle's winter fashion? Frostbite chic. You force a smile, but your lips are chapped, and the cold's making your joints ache. You try to warm your hands over the hearth, but the flames sputter, and a gust from the window nearly kills them. You're starting to feel like that woman in the birthing room, battling impossible odds. The castle's dangers, rot, noise, fire, were bad, but this cold is a slow, cruel torture. You find a corner where the wind's less brutal, but it's still like sitting in a snowbank. You're tempted to curl up and sleep, but you know you'd wake up a popsicle. The castle's winter is a predator, and you're its prey. You're starting to wonder how anyone survived January here without losing fingers or hope. You glance at the door, praying the next room has a better fire, but the howl of the wind says otherwise. You stand, stomping your feet to get the blood flowing, and notice a frozen puddle by the window. It's a small thing, but it feels like the castle's mocking you, daring you to keep going. You're not just tired, you're battered, and winter's only started. You take a shaky step toward the door, your breath a white cloud, and brace yourself for more of this icy nightmare. The castle's cold is a thief, stealing your warmth and your will, and you're running out of both. You're still trembling from that winter tower's icy claws. Your fingers barely thawed as you stumble into a lavish hall where tension hangs thicker than the cold. The air buzzes with whispered plots, and you catch a noble's sharp glance, like you've walked into a trap. Medieval castles, like those during the Wars of the Roses, were hotbeds of betrayal, with courtiers scheming for power behind every tapestry. You freeze, realizing you're not just dodging frostbite, you're navigating a den of vipers. You slip behind a pillar, trying to blend in, but the hall's alive with danger. Nobles huddle in corners, their smiles sharp as daggers, while servants dart about, carrying messages that could spell someone's doom. A quirky tidbit. Some castles had secret passages like those at Nottingham, used for eavesdropping or quick escapes during coups. You eye a shadowed alcove, wondering if it hides a tunnel or a spy, and your pulse quickens. One wrong word here, and you're in the dungeon you fled earlier. The hall's grandeur, polished tables, gilded cups, hides a brutal truth. Trust is a luxury. Historians still argue whether castle betrayals were driven more by greed or fear of losing favor. Either way, you're on edge. You overhear a knight mutter about a rival's accident, and you shrink back, remembering those crumbling walls that could crush you just as easily as a schemer's blade. A joke to steady your nerves. Why did the noble avoid castle parties? Too many backstabs on the dance floor. You chuckle, but it's shaky as you dodge a servant's tray, afraid it's a cover for poison. Fun fact, betrayals were so common that lords, like Edward IV, often slept with guards at their doors, yet still fell to plots. You're no lord, but you feel the same paranoia, every glance a potential threat. You're starting to miss that winter chill, at least it was honest. You move through the crowd, keeping your head low, but a lady's laugh cuts off when you pass, and you wonder if you're the joke. The castle's dangers, fleas, fires, rotten food, were bad, but this human menace is worse. You remember that birthing room's raw vulnerability. Here, weakness is a death sentence. You spot a knight slipping a note to a scribe, and your stomach twists. Is it a love letter or a death warrant? You don't want to find out. Another joke. What's a castle plotter's favorite game? Clue, but with real knives. You force a smile, but your hands sweat as you navigate the hall's maze of whispers. You're tempted to bolt, but running would draw eyes, and you've had enough of being watched from that privacy-starved great hall. You pause by a tapestry, pretending to admire its stitching, but you're listening, catching fragments of talk about land, titles, and removing someone. This place isn't just a fortress, it's a chessboard, and you're a pawn. You edge toward a side door, but a guard's stare stops you cold. You're not sure if he's loyal or bought, and that uncertainty is the real terror. The castle's betrayals are a slow poison, seeping into every interaction. You're starting to feel like that woman in labor, fighting for survival in a system that doesn't care. You're not just dodging plots, you're dodging a culture where loyalty is a lie. You finally reach the door, slipping out before anyone can corner you. Your heart's racing, and you lean against the corridor's cold stone, grateful for its silence. The hall's schemes linger in your mind, a reminder that this castle's dangers aren't just physical. You take a deep breath, the air sharp with winter's bite, and move forward, praying the next room doesn't demand your trust or your life. You're still rattled from that hall of whispered betrayals, your nerves frayed as you escape into a low-ceilinged chamber thick with haze. You cough, your eyes stinging, as smoke from a central hearth curls around you like a fog. Medieval castles, like those in the 12th century, had abysmal ventilation, with smoke from fires lingering in rooms, choking residents. You wave your hand, trying to clear the air, but it's like swimming through a campfire, and your throat burns. The hearth is massive, but its chimney, a narrow flue in the wall, is too small, trapping smoke inside. You squint through the haze, spotting servants fanning the air with cloths, their faces red and sweaty. A quirky tidbit. Some castles used smoke bays, crude hoods over fires, but they often collapsed, dumping ash on everyone below. You glance up, praying the blackened beams hold, and remember those crumbling walls from before. This place is falling apart in every way. Your chest tightens with each breath, and you're starting to feel lightheaded. Historians still argue whether poor ventilation was a design flaw or just low priority compared to defense. Either way, you're suffocating. You stumble toward a window slit, hoping for fresh air, but the winter wind from that icy tower room only stirs the smoke, making you cough harder. You're missing that scheming hall now. At least you could breathe there. A joke to clear your lungs. Why did the castle hire a chimney sweep? Because it was tired of smoking. You chuckle, but it turns into a hacking cough. Fun fact. Smoke inhalation was so common that castle dwellers often developed chronic lung issues, with records from places like York showing smoke sickness as a frequent complaint. You're not surprised. Every inhale feels like swallowing ash. You're starting to understand why tapestries were sooty. This castle's air is a health hazard. You try to find a corner with less smoke, but the room's a haze, and the fire's crackle mocks your efforts. You remember that fiery hall's sparks? This is worse. A slow poison instead of a quick burn. You spot a child curled up near the hearth, coughing but too cold to move away, and your heart sinks. The castle's dangers, betrayals, rotten food, deadly stares, are relentless. But this smoke is a quiet killer, stealing your breath one puff at a time. Another joke. What's a castle's favorite workout? The cough and wheeze. You force a smile, but your eyes water and you're dizzy now. You're tempted to crawl to the floor, where the air is slightly clearer, but it's filthy with ash and straw. You're starting to feel trapped, like that woman in the birthing room, fighting a losing battle. The castle's not just uncomfortable. It's choking the life out of you. and you're desperate for a gasp of clean air. You weave through this room, dodging servants who seem numb to the smoke, their eyes bloodshot. You're not sure how they stand it, but you're not sticking around to learn their secret. You find a door, its frame warped from damp, and push through, hoping for relief. The corridor's cold but clearer, and you gulp the air, your lungs grateful but still aching. You're starting to see this castle as a death trap, each room a new way to suffer. Fleas, plots, and now this smoky torture. You pause, leaning against the wall, and wipe your streaming eyes. The smoke's left a bitter taste in your mouth, a reminder that even the castle's warmth comes with a price. You're not just fighting for air, you're fighting to survive a place that seems designed to break you. You take a shaky step forward, the distant crackle of the hearth still in your ears, and brace yourself for whatever this stone nightmare throws at you next. You're still coughing from that smoky chamber, your lungs raw as you stumble into a courtyard where a well sits, its wooden bucket swaying in the winter breeze. You're parched, desperate for a drink to wash away the ash in your throat, but the water you draw looks murky, flecked with grit. Medieval castles, like those in the Welsh marches, often struggled with clean water, their wells contaminated by runoff from moats or latrines. You hesitate, the bucket's sour smell reminding you of that vile guardrobe chute, but thirst wins, and you take a cautious sip. Yep, it's as bad as it looks. You spit it out, grimacing, and notice the well's rim is slimy, coated with algae. The castle's water supply is a gamble, with shallow wells often tainted by the same filth you've been dodging. Moat sludge, kitchen waste, even pest droppings from that flea-ridden storage room. A quirky tidbit. Some castles boiled water with herbs to purify it, but it mostly just tasted like a swampy tea. You're tempted to try, but the nearest fire is probably that smoky death trap you just fled, so you pass. Your throat's still scratchy, and you're starting to feel queasy from that one sip. Historians still argue whether castle water woes were worse because of poor well placement, or because sieges cut off external sources. Either way, you're dehydrated and stuck with this foul brew. You glance around, hoping for a barrel of ale, safer if not tastier, but all you see are muddy puddles reflecting the gray sky. You're missing that scheming hall's gilded cups, even if they held poison. A joke to lift your spirits. Why did the castle well go out of business? Its water was too well done. You chuckle, but it's weak as you wipe your mouth, still tasting grit. Fun fact, contaminated water caused outbreaks like dysentery, which ravaged castles like Kenilworth in the 13th century, killing more than enemy swords. You're not surprised. This well's a petri dish, and you're already regretting that sip. You're starting to understand why castle folk drank so much wine. It was less likely to kill you. You step back, eyeing the bucket like it's a traitor. The courtyard's busy, servants hauling laundry, a horse drinking from a trough that looks no cleaner than your well. You're starting to miss the winter tower's frost. At least it didn't make you gag. The castle's dangers, smoke, betrayals, rotten food, are piling up. But this water crisis feels personal, like the castle's daring you to survive its hospitality. You're not just thirsty, you're fighting a losing battle against filth. Another joke, what's a castle well's favorite toast? Here's to your health or not. You force a smile, but your stomach churns, and you're praying that sip doesn't come back to haunt you. You're tempted to ask a passing servant for advice, but they're guzzling from the same well, unfazed. You're starting to feel like that woman in the birthing room, facing impossible odds with no good options. The castle's not just uncomfortable, it's a health hazard, and you're its latest victim. You wander toward a stone bench, hoping to rest and forget your thirst, but the air carries a whiff of that moat stench, reminding you how close the well is to that toxic soup. You're trapped in a cycle of grime, and every choice, drink, eat, breathe, feels like a risk. You're starting to wonder how anyone lasted a week here without collapsing. You sit, your throat still dry, and scan the courtyard for anything potable, but the castle's laughing at your hope. You stand, shaking off the dread, and head for a shadowed archway, praying the next room offers something, anything cleaner. Your boots splash in a puddle and you shudder, the well's taste lingering. The castle's water woes are just another nail in its coffin, and you're running out of patience. You take a deep breath, bracing for more misery, and step forward, the bucket's creak echoing like a warning of what's to come. You're still grimacing from that foul well water, its gritty aftertaste lingering as you shuffle into a bustling lower hall where servants toil like ants. You're roped into helping, handed a heavy broom to sweep the floor, and soon your back aches from the endless grind. Medieval castles, like those in the 14th century, relied on back-breaking labor to function, with servants and peasants working dawn to dusk to keep the place running. You sweep, dodging a cart of firewood, and realize this castle's upkeep is a relentless, soul-crushing marathon. The floor is littered with straw, ash, and what looks like spilled stew, and every sweep stirs up dust that tickles your already raw throat. You're surrounded by workers, maids scrubbing walls, boys hauling water, a cook lugging a cauldron, each moving like they're racing a clock. A quirky tidbit: some castles employed gong farmers to clear latrine pits at night, a job so vile they were banned from daytime socializing. You glance at that murky well you drank from, shuddering at the thought of where its water's been, and keep sweeping, your arms burning. Your broom snags on a loose flagstone, nearly tripping you, and you curse under your breath. Historians still argue whether castle labor was harsher because of constant repairs or because lords demanded luxury on a shoestring budget. Either way, you're exhausted. You're starting to miss that smoky chamber's haze. At least you could sit there. Here, a gruff overseer barks at you to move faster, and you grit your teeth, pushing through the pain. A joke to ease your aching back. Why did the servant love castle work? Because it was a real sweet deal. You chuckle, but it's strained as you dodge a bucket of slop being carted past. Fun fact, servants often worked 16-hour days, with records from places like Dover showing they collapsed from exhaustion, sometimes dying on the job. You're not surprised, your shoulders are screaming, and you've only been at it an hour. This castle's not just filthy, it's a labor camp. You pause to stretch, but the overseer's glare sends you back to work. You're starting to understand why castle folk look so worn. Between the bad water, the betrayals, and now this. Rest is a fantasy. You remember that noisy hall's sleepless night. This is worse. A physical grind that leaves you hollow. You sweep harder, stirring up more dust, and cough, your lungs still sore from that smoky room. The castle's dangers are piling up, and you're the one cleaning up the mess. Another joke. What's a castle servant's favorite exercise? The endless grind. You force a smile, but your hands blister as you grip the broom. You're tempted to slack off, but a maid nearby whispers about a worker flogged for dropping a tray. You're not just working. You're surviving a system that punishes weakness. You're starting to feel like that woman in the birthing room, fighting against a cruel machine. The castle's not just uncomfortable, it's a beast that chews up its workers. You finally clear a patch of floor, but it's pointless. New dirt tracks in from muddy boots. You're trapped in a cycle of futility, and the overseer's already yelling about scrubbing the walls next. You're starting to miss the siege's hunger. At least you could lie down. The hall's chaos, clanging pots, shouting workers, drowns out your thoughts, and you're running on fumes. You're not just tired. Concurrent session detected. Switching to new session for consistency. Please continue with continue if you wish to proceed with the next section. You're still aching from that brutal sweeping, your blisters raw as you slip away from the servants' hall, desperate for a moment's rest. The castle's dim corridors lead you to a shadowy chapel, where flickering candles cast eerie shapes on the stone walls. A chill runs through you, not just from the cold, but from a sudden creak that sounds like a whisper. Medieval castles, like those in Scotland's Highlands, were rife with ghost stories, their dark halls fueling superstitions that kept everyone on edge. You pause, heart thudding, as the air feels heavier, like someone's watching. You step inside, the chapel's silence a stark contrast to the labor hall's clamor, but it's not comforting. The candles gutter, and you swear you hear a faint moan. Maybe the wind, maybe something else. A quirky tidbit. Castle folk often blamed boggarts, mischievous spirits, for misplaced tools or strange noises, and some left milk offerings to appease them. You glance at a dusty altar, half tempted to leave something yourself, but all you've got is a stale biscuit crumb from that privacy-starved great hall. No thanks, boggart. The chapel's walls are carved with grim saints, their stone eyes seeming to follow you. Historians still argue whether these superstitions were genuine beliefs or a way to explain the castle's many dangers. Crumbling walls, bad water, betrayals. Either way, you're spooked. You clutch your cloak, remembering that smoky room's haze. This is worse, a creeping dread that makes every shadow a threat. You're starting to miss the overseer's shouts. At least they were human. A joke to calm your nerves. Why did the ghost haunt the castle? It wanted to be the little spoon. You chuckle, but it's shaky as a floorboard groans underfoot. Fun fact, castles like Glamis were so notorious for hauntings that servants refused to work alone at night, claiming they saw figures in empty halls. You're not alone here. A priest kneels at the altar, but his muttered prayers sound like warnings, and you're not sure if he's warding off spirits or something worse. You move toward a pew, hoping to sit, but a cold draft snuffs a candle, plunging half the chapel into darkness. Your imagination runs wild. Those dungeon chains, that birthing room's cries, all morphing into ghostly echoes. You're starting to understand why castle folk clung to charms and prayers. This place feels alive with menace. You remember that well's foul water. Maybe it's cursed too. You're not just fighting fear, you're fighting a castle that seems to breathe unease. Another joke. What's a castle ghost's favorite prank? Flickering the lights, medieval style. You force a smile, but your hands tremble as you light a fallen candle, its weak flame barely pushing back the dark. You're tempted to run, but the chapel's the only quiet place you've found, and you're too tired to face more labor. You sit, the pew creaking, and try to ignore the shadows dancing on the walls, each one looking like a figure ready to pounce. You glance at the priest, hoping for reassurance, but he's lost in prayer, oblivious to the chapel's eerie vibe. You're starting to feel like you're in that scheming hall again, surrounded by unseen threats. The castle's not just uncomfortable, it's a maze of fear, and this chapel's ghostly whispers are its latest trick. You're not sure what's worse, the tangible dangers or these intangible terrors. You hug your arms, trying to shake the dread, and pray the next room offers something solid to fear. You stand, the chapel's chill clinging to you, and head for the door, the candles flickering like they're laughing. Your boots echo, too loud in the silence, and you flinch at another creak. The castle's superstitions are getting to you, and you're running out of courage. You step into the corridor, the chapel's shadows at your back, and brace yourself for whatever this haunted stone pile throws at you next. You're still jumpy from that creepy chapel, the ghostly whispers chasing you as you hurry up a narrow staircase and emerge onto the castle's battlements. The wind howls, carrying the distant shouts of soldiers, and you're handed a bucket of boiling oil to pour on imaginary invaders below. Medieval castles, like those during the 100 Years' War, were war machines, and defending them meant gruesome, dangerous work. You grip the bucket, its heat searing through your gloves, and realize this castle's defense is as deadly to you as to its enemies. You peer over the edge, the moat's sickly glint far below reminding you of its stench. The oil steams, its acrid smell burning your nose, and you're careful not to spill. One splash could scald you into next week. A quirky tidbit. Some castles used murder holes above gates, letting defenders drop oil or stones on attackers, but clumsy soldiers often burned themselves instead. You steady your hands, praying you're not about to become a cautionary tale, and feel the weight of this brutal job. The battlements are chaos. Archers knocking arrows, guards shouting, a catapult creaking nearby. Historians still argue whether castle defenses were deadlier because of constant attacks, or because the tools, like this oil, were so hazardous. Either way, you're sweating despite the winter chill from that icy tower. You're starting to miss the chapel's eerie quiet. At least ghosts don't demand you wield liquid fire. Your arms ache, and the bucket's heat is relentless, like holding a dragon's breath. A joke to cool your nerves. Why did the castle defender quit? He was tired of getting burned. You chuckle, but it's tense as a soldier barks at you to move faster. Fun fact, boiling oil was a rare tactic, too costly. But when used, like at the Siege of Orleans, it left horrific burns, scarring both sides. You're not fighting now, but the oil's weight and heat make you feel like you're on the front lines. You're starting to understand why castle warfare was so grim. Danger came from within as much as without. You shuffle along the battlement, dodging a loose stone that could have sent you tumbling, a callback to those deadly staircases. The oil sloshes, and you wince, imagining it splashing your legs. You're starting to feel like that laboring servant trapped in endless toil. But this is worse. Your life's on the line. You remember the scheming hall's whispers. At least they didn't burn. The wind whips your cloak, and you're torn between freezing and frying, the castle's cruel duality striking again. Another joke. What's a castle defender's favorite recipe? Scalding soup, served hot. You force a smile, but your hands tremble as you position the bucket over a chute. A soldier demonstrates, pouring a stream of oil that sizzles on the stone below, and you gag at the thought of it hitting flesh. You're not just defending, you're wielding a weapon that terrifies you. The castle's not just uncomfortable, it's a battlefield, and you're its reluctant warrior. You set the bucket down, your gloves scorched, and wipe sweat from your brow. The battlements are alive with activity, but you feel alone, dwarfed by the castle's massive walls. You're starting to miss the birthing room's raw humanity. This feels mechanical, merciless. You glance at the horizon, hoping for peace, but the soldiers' shouts remind you war's always looming. You're not just tired, you're battered, caught in a machine that chews up defenders as easily as invaders. You step back, the oil's heat still radiating, and lean against a merlin, its stone cold against your back. The castle's defense is a brutal necessity, but it's costing you your strength, your nerve, your safety. You take a shaky breath, the air sharp with winter and war, and head for the stairs, praying the next task doesn't involve more fire. The battlement's clamor follows you, a reminder that this castle thrives on conflict, and you're just its latest pawn. You're still shaken from the battlements, the heat of that boiling oil lingering on your scorched gloves as you descend into a dim, musty chamber that smells of damp straw and blood. You're pulled to a corner where a wounded soldier lies, his leg wrapped in a rag oozing red. Medieval castles, like those during the Crusades, had no real medical care, relying on crude remedies that often did more harm than good. You're handed a bowl of vinegar to clean his wound, and the sharp stench makes you wince, dreading what's next. You kneel beside the soldier, his face pale and slick with sweat, and dab the vinegar on his gash. He groans, and you flinch, feeling useless. The healer nearby, a grim-faced woman, mutters about balancing humors, but her tools are just a rusty knife and some moldy herbs. A quirky tidbit. Some castle healers use spider webs to stop bleeding, believing they had magical properties, but they often carried infections. You glance at the straw beneath you, remembering those fleas, and pray no webs are involved here. This wound's bad enough. The chamber's lit by a single torch, casting shadows that make every movement feel desperate. Historians still argue whether castle medicine failed more from ignorance or because war left no time for proper care. Either way, you're watching a man suffer with no real help. You try to steady your hands, but the vinegar stings your own blisters from that servant's broom, and you're starting to miss the battlement's chaos. At least you weren't playing doctor there. A joke to ease the grimness. Why did the castle healer fail stand-up? Her patients kept passing out. You chuckle softly, but the soldier's moan kills the humor. Fun fact, infections like gangrene were so common in castles that amputations, done without anesthesia, were a leading cause of death, as seen in records from places like Rochester. You're not cutting anything, but the soldier's feverish eyes make you fear he's not long for this world. You're starting to understand why castle life was so short. Every injury was a roll of the dice. You rewrap the wound, the rag already soaked, and the healer hands you a poultice of garlic and mud. It smells like that rancid kitchen, and you doubt it'll help. You're starting to feel like that woman in the birthing room, watching life slip through your fingers. The castle's dangers, bad water, ghostly chills, boiling oil, are relentless. But this medical failure hits hardest, a reminder that pain here has no cure. You're not just cleaning a wound, you're delaying the inevitable. Another joke. What's a castle healer's motto? If it hurts, it's working. You force a smile, but your stomach twists as the soldier grips your arm, muttering about home. You're tempted to lie, to say he'll be fine, but the healer's shaking head stops you. You're surrounded by suffering. Another man coughs nearby, his face gray, and the chamber's damp walls seem to close in, like that smoky room's haze. You're not just fighting infection, you're fighting despair in a place that offers no hope. You stand, your knees aching, and hand the bowl back to the healer. She doesn't meet your eyes, already moving to the next patient. You're starting to miss the scheming hall's tension. At least it didn't smell of death. The castle's medical limits are a cruel joke, and you're the punchline, stuck helping with no real power. You head for the door, the soldiers' groans echoing, and pray the next room offers something less heartbreaking. You pause in the corridor, the torchlight weak, and wipe your hands on your cloak, the vinegar's sting lingering. The castle's not just uncomfortable, it's a graveyard for the wounded, and you're running out of strength to face its horrors. You take a shaky step forward, the air cold and heavy, and brace yourself for whatever this merciless stone maze throws at you next. You're still haunted by the soldiers' groans, the vinegar's sting on your hands as you flee that grim infirmary into a bustling hall where rigid hierarchies rule. You're shoved aside by a noble in furs, his glare reminding you of your place, or lack thereof. Medieval castles, like those in feudal England, were social cages, with strict class divisions dictating every interaction, from who eats first to who sweeps the floor. You try to blend in, but your patched cloak screams outsider, and the weight of judgment feels heavier than that boiling oil bucket. You stand by a long table, watching lords feast on venison, while servants like you get crusts, if you're lucky. The hall's alive with clinking goblets and loud boasts, but you're invisible unless you step out of line. A quirky tidbit. Some castles had sumptuary laws, rules banning lower classes from wearing bright colors. So your drab cloak isn't just poor, it's legally mandated. You tug at it, feeling smaller, and remember that privacy-starved great hall where every move was watched. This is worse. Here, your status defines you. A knight snaps his fingers, demanding you fetch more ale, and you scurry to obey, your blisters throbbing from that servant's broom. Historians still argue whether these hierarchies were enforced to maintain order or to crush rebellion before it started. Either way, you're trapped in a pecking order that offers no escape. You pour the ale, careful not to spill, but the knight barely glances at you, and a maid snickers at your clumsiness. You're starting to miss the infirmary's grim equality. At least pain didn't care about rank. A joke to lift your spirits. Why did the peasant avoid the castle feast? He didn't want to be the main course. You chuckle, but it's hollow as a lord's laugh drowns you out. Fun fact, social divides were so stark that peasants, like those at Windsor Castle, were sometimes barred from certain halls, forced to eat in stables. You're lucky to be here, but it feels like punishment. Every sneer a reminder of your place. You're not just serving ale, you're serving a system that grinds you down. You weave through the crowd, dodging elbows and spilled wine, but there's no safe corner. A noble woman's glare makes you flinch, her jeweled hand waving you away like a fly. You're starting to feel like that wounded soldier fighting a losing battle. The castle's dangers, bad water, ghostly chills, crude medicine, are brutal, but this social cage is a slow suffocation, stripping your dignity with every order. You remember the scheming hall's whispers. Here, the threat's not betrayal, but being erased, reduced to a pair of hands. Another joke. What's a castle's favorite hierarchy? The one where you're at the bottom. You force a smile, but your back aches as you lug another pitcher. You're tempted to drop it, to rebel, but a guard's watchful eye stops you. You're starting to understand why castle folk obeyed despite the misery. Defiance meant the dungeon or worse. You're not just working, you're surviving a world where power is everything, and you have none. You set the pitcher down, your arms trembling, and catch a glimpse of the high table, where lords laugh over plates you'll never taste. The hall's warmth is a cruel tease, like that smoky hearth's fleeting heat. And you're still hungry, still tired. You're starting to miss the battlement's danger. At least you felt alive there. This hall's a prison of status, and you're its lowest inmate. You edge toward the door, hoping to slip away, but a servant's sharp "Oi!" pulls you back to another task. You pause, wiping sweat from your brow, and feel the castle's weight, its rules, its scorn, pressing on you. The hall's noise swirls, a reminder that you're nothing here, just another cog in a cruel machine. You take a shaky breath, steeling yourself for more orders, and move forward, praying the next room offers a shred of respect. But the castle's hierarchy is a chain, and you're tangled in it, with no key in sight. You're still stinging from the hall's crushing hierarchy, The noble's sneer burned into your mind as you limp into a dim storeroom, its air heavy with the musty scent of rot. You're tasked with patching a sagging wooden beam, its surface soft and crumbling under your touch. Medieval castles, like those in the 15th century, were in constant decay, their stone and timber frames needing endless repairs to avoid collapse. You hammer a brace into place, your arms aching from that servant's broom, and realize this castle's falling apart faster than your spirits. The beam creaks ominously, and you spot wormholes peppering the wood, a sign it's been neglected for years. Dust falls, tickling your throat, still raw from that smoky chamber. A quirky tidbit. Some castles used oak soaked in urine to resist rot, but the smell made rooms unlivable. Imagine that mixed with the moat's stench. You're grateful this beam's just damp, but every swing of your hammer feels like tempting fate, and you're half expecting the ceiling to cave in, like those crumbling walls you dodged early on. Your hands blister as you work, the storeroom's chill seeping into your bones, a cruel echo of that winter tower. Historians still argue whether castle decay was worse because lords skimped on upkeep or because war diverted resources. Either way, you're fighting a losing battle against time and rot. You step back, wiping sweat despite the cold, and notice a crack in the wall spidering upward. This place isn't just decaying, it's dying, and you're stuck playing handyman in a house of cards. A joke to steady your hands. Why did the castle get a renovation? It was tired of falling apart. You chuckle, but it's nervous as the beam groans again. Fun fact: castles like Harlech needed constant repairs, with records showing entire wings abandoned when funds ran dry, leaving them to rot. You're not surprised. Every nail you drive feels pointless, like patching a sinking ship. You're starting to miss the social hall's sneers. At least they didn't threaten to bury you in rubble. You move to another beam, this one sagging so low it grazes your head. The storeroom's piled with moldy crates, their contents probably as bad as that rancid pork from the kitchen. You're starting to feel like that wounded soldier, patching up something too far gone. The castle's dangers, bad water, ghostly chills, cruel hierarchies, are relentless. But this decay is a slow, creeping threat, eating away at the very walls that trap you. You hammer harder, but the wood splinters, and you jump back, heart racing. Another joke. What's a castle's favorite DIY project? Keeping itself from crumbling. You force a smile, but your hands shake as you pry out a rotten plank, revealing a nest of beetles scurrying away. You're tempted to drop the hammer and run, but a gruff carpenter's glare keeps you working. You're not just fixing beams, you're fighting a castle that's rotting from the inside out, and you're losing. You're starting to understand why castle folk lived in fear, not just of war, but of their own home collapsing. You pause, catching your breath, and notice a damp patch on the floor, likely from a leaking roof. It's a small thing, but it feels like the castle's mocking you, daring you to keep patching its wounds. You're starting to miss the battlement's boiling oil. At least it was a quick danger. This decay is patient, relentless, and you're its latest victim, sweating over beams that won't last the year. You drive another nail, the sound echoing in the dim room, and pray the next task doesn't involve more rot. You step back, the beam still creaking, and wipe your brow, the storeroom's gloom pressing on you. The castle's decay is a mirror of its misery, crumbling, neglected, and unforgiving. You take a shaky step toward the door, the hammer heavy in your hand, and brace yourself for whatever this collapsing stone nightmare throws at you next. The rot's in the air, in the walls, in your bones, and you're running out of strength to fight it. You're still battered from wrestling that rotting beam, the splinters in your fingers stinging as you wander into a quiet corridor, the castle's weight pressing on your soul. You lean against a cold wall, its damp stone a familiar misery, and realize you're dreaming of escape. Green fields, open skies, anything but this stone prison. Medieval castles, like those in feudal Europe, were traps even for the powerful, their walls locking in lords and peasants alike with no easy way out. You sigh, your breath clouding in the chill, and no freedom's just a fantasy here. The corridor's empty, save for a flickering torch casting long shadows. You imagine slipping through a gate, past that foul moat, but the castle's design, narrow passages, guarded doors, makes it a fortress against leaving as much as entering. A quirky tidbit. Some nobles, like a 14th century knight at Alnwick, were so paranoid about escape attempts they chained servants to their posts at night. You touch your wrist, half expecting iron, and feel the castle's grip, a cruel echo of that dungeon's chains you fled long ago. Your boots echo as you walk, each step heavy with exhaustion. Historians still argue whether castles trapped people more by physical barriers or by social obligations, debts, oaths, fear of exile. Either way, you're stuck. You pass a window slit, the winter wind from that icy tower howling through, and see the world outside, distant hills, untouchable. You're starting to miss the storeroom's rot. At least it kept you busy. Here, the silence lets you dwell on how this castle's stolen your hope. A joke to lift the gloom. Why did the castle gate get therapy? It had too many open and shut cases. You chuckle, but it's hollow as you spot a locked door. Its iron bolts a reminder of your cage. Fun fact, escape attempts were rare but brutal, with records from places like Carlisle showing runaways hunted down like deer. Their punishments worse than the dungeon's oubliette. You're not running. Too tired? Too broken. But the thought of being hunted makes your stomach twist. You're not just trapped. You're owned. You pause by the door, tracing its bolts, and imagine what's beyond. Maybe a village. Maybe just more walls. You're starting to feel like that wounded soldier, clinging to life with no real chance. The castle's dangers, crumbling beams, bad water, cruel hierarchies, have worn you down. But this trapped feeling is the final blow, a slow crush of your spirit. You remember the scheming hall's whispers, the birthing room's cries. They were awful, but they were alive. This corridor's dead, and it's pulling you under. Another joke, what's a castle's favorite trap? The one you never leave. You force a smile, but your eyes sting, and you're not sure if it's the torch's smoke or something deeper. You're tempted to bang on the door, to scream for release. But who'd hear? The castle's a machine, and you're just a cog. Like those servants slaving in the labor hall. You're not just fighting walls. You're fighting a life that offers no way out, no matter how hard you dream. You slump to the floor, the stone cold against your back, and stare at the torch's dying flame. The castle's won. It's cold. It's filth. Its chains have beaten you. You're starting to understand why castle folk stayed, endured, died here. Escape was a lie, and hope was a luxury. You close your eyes, the corridor's silence deafening, and let the weight of it all settle. There's no next room, no new horror, just this truth. The castle's your world, and it's never letting go. You're sinking into that heavy realization, the corridor's chill wrapping around you like a shroud. But let's slow down now. Ease you out of this stone nightmare. Picture the torchlight softening, its flicker growing gentle, like a candle by your bedside. The castle's walls fade, their cold grip loosening as you drift toward a quieter place. A meadow, perhaps, where the air is clean, and the only sound is a soft breeze rustling the grass. You're not trapped anymore. You're resting, your aches melting away like morning frost. The moat's stench, the dungeon's chains, the betrayals. They're just echoes now, distant and powerless. You're safe, wrapped in the calm of this moment, where no walls can hold you. Let your breath slow, each inhale pulling you closer to peace, each exhale releasing the castle's weight. The world outside is waiting, full of light and open skies, and you're already halfway there. Sleep's calling, gentle as a whisper, and you're ready to answer. Sweet dreams.